So what do sewing machine repair and servicing professionals do that you can't do yourself at home? And what can you do at home to make problems with your machine less likely? And what noises coming from your machine should you definitely not ignore? These are just some of the many questions that sewing machine technician Bizz McKilligan answers for us today. I first spoke to Bizz over a year ago when she just started up her sustainability-focused sewing store, the Green Thimble. She gives us an update on how it's going and what she's learnt over that time. You know what I'm going to say? Stick around a few minutes and we'll get into it. Welcome to Check Your Thread, the podcast that will help you sew more sustainably. My name's Zoe and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 17 years and I'm the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate and ecological crises, and I'm looking at the way that my lifestyle contributes to them. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me in this journey. Hi, lovely listener. How are you doing today? And what are you up to? I'd love to know. So this episode is pretty jam-packed with awesomeness, but I just want to squeeze in a little sustainability win that I recently had that you might find useful. So when I'm sewing, I like to use chalk wheels to mark my fabric. So if you haven't seen them, they're kind of like a stubby pen kind of shape thing. And then when you roll them along your fabric, they leave behind a fine chalk dust line. I prefer using them over the kind of old-fashioned chalk triangles because the line that you get is much finer and I feel it's therefore quite a lot more accurate. Anyway, the two that I have been running out of chalk for ages, but you can get these refills, but I've been reluctant to buy them because they kind of come with almost as much plastic as just buying a brand new chalk wheel. And of course, that's just going to end up in landfill. But during a recent Zoom mending meetup with some of the lovely Check Your Thread patrons, I had a brainwave. So I just simply got one of my old-fashioned chalk triangles and a craft knife and I shaved off some of the chalk, which created some dust shavings that I used to refill my chalk wheel. And it works perfectly. I've also heard that you can use talcum powder as an alternative to refill empty chalk wheels, but I haven't tested that personally. If you have, please report back and let me know if that works okay as well. Massive thanks this week to Sarala, who kindly signed up to support the podcast via Patreon. This podcast is ad-free thanks to the kind support of patrons like Sarala. If you'd like to help keep this podcast afloat, please head to patreon.com/check your thread, where you can get a vibe of the kind of behind the scenes stuff that I share over there. And you can sign up for literally any amount per month that makes sense for you. Right, let's turn our attentions to today's conversation. So, as I was saying before, Bizz was first on the podcast at the beginning of last year, and that was episode 120. Bizz shared heaps of useful tips and information about sewing machine maintenance and repair. And today she's back giving out heaps more of invaluable advice. We also get the super interesting update on how her business, the Green Thimble, is going after a year of being open. So huge thanks to the patrons who supplied some truly excellent questions to pose to Bizz. The patrons always come up with some really insightful things to ask guests when I put a shout out. But there was one question that came in that I forgot to ask Bizz during the recording, which I asked her via email instead. The question came from Christina. Christina wrote, I recently had a few older sewing machines end up as new adoptees in my sewing room that need repair. I love keeping them out of landfill, but they need fairly intense work like rewiring, etc. Plus, my youngest is thinking of doing this kind of thing on the side when he's older. Where can people do a sort of correspondence course for this, or is it just something that one develops over time? So Bizz's reply to Christina's question was this. Unfortunately, I've yet to find a course of any description on sewing machine repair. One can get training from a dealer on the brands that they sell as an employee, but it can be one of those things where you need experience to get a job and a job to get experience. I started by cutting out fabric at a quilt store that sold and serviced machines, and then moved into the parts and ordering department, slowly picking up knowledge over time until they finally started training me for real. My best advice would be to reach out to local technicians and see if they would be willing to take you on as an apprentice or even volunteer. Good luck, it may take some time and dedication. So an update to that is that Christina got back in touch to say that they had found an online course to learn sewing machine repair, and that's via a website called Sewing Doc Academy. Bizz says that she wishes that course had been around a few years sooner when she was trying to get her foot in the door. So I've put a link to that course in the show notes for people who are interested. So I hope you enjoy this episode. I know it's going to make you reach for your sewing machine oil because it certainly did for me. So until next week, take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones, take care of the wider global community. Happy Pride Month, everyone, and enjoy. Thank you so much, Bizz, for coming to talk to me again. So we spoke a bit over a year ago, just at the beginning of your business, the Green Thimble. You'd pretty much just opened your shop, I think, at that point, wasn't it?
We were only open for a few months at that time.
That's wild. So we had an amazing conversation and you told us all about your background, the journey that you went on to become a sewing machine repair technician, and you shared tons of amazing advice about caring for sewing machines. And that was episode 120, so if people haven't heard it before, definitely check that out. But now you're back, and it's a year later, you've got a year of your business under your belt, so congratulations. We're going to hear about what's been going on in that time, including how your business has changed, and you've also kindly agreed to answer some questions from Check Your Thread patrons about sewing machine maintenance and repair. But for those who haven't heard episode 120 yet, can you please tell us who you are, where you are, and what fills your days?
So my name is Bizz. I am the owner and sewing machine technician at the Green Thimble in Victoria, BC, Canada. I spend a lot of my day working on machines and answering so many emails and helping customers with their sewing related questions.
So what are the emails related to sewing machines? Have you made yourself too successful?
Yeah, they're my business emails. So lots of sorting invoices and getting back to people and answering questions. There's a lot of emails. Yep.
and they never stop. And you think, yeah, nailed it. No, turn your back. Here they come.
You're like, oh yeah, I got through 20 emails. How did 15 more come in my inbox?
Yeah. Then you go for lunch and it's, oh no. I get it. Awesome. So let's get stuck into the questions first.
Yeah, those are good questions.
Yeah, so thank you so much to the lovely patrons who took the time to come up with these gems. Right, okay, so let's start with some really broad questions, the kind that are going to help absolutely everybody who has a sewing machine of their own, and then we can get to the ones that are a bit more specific. So let's kick off with Bron's question. Bron asked, I'd be interested to know what actually happens when a professional services my machine. How much of it is maintenance that I should be doing anyway, and what do they do that the manual doesn't tell me to do?
So, especially with newer machines, the manuals tell you to do very little. Part of that is because a lot of them are computerized now, and so they don't want you messing around with the computer part of things or getting oil where it shouldn't be. Whereas the older mechanical machines, you could basically dunk in oil and nothing was going to be a problem there, except maybe the motor. But other than that, you could literally just dip them in a vat of oil and you wouldn't hurt your machine. You can't do that now. The new ones are a bit different.
Yeah, no doing that.
So what we do, our process typically is that we take all the covers off that can come off, and then we can blow out or suck out any lint that's built up inside the machine. And so lint gets farther than you can see in your machine. So and I know we're going to get to this later, but you should be cleaning that out regularly. But you don't get to all of it. You just can't reach it without actually taking the machine apart. The new ones especially can be complicated on how they come apart and a specific order that they have to come apart in order to get to all of the pieces of the machine that you can't see as a user.
Right. Okay. So that sounds like it's a good thing that we're taking it to professional. This is not stuff we could be doing at home.
Typically not. No. So once we got all of the dust and lint that's built up out, then we can flush out all of the old oil that has been on the machine since the last time it was serviced and put fresh oil in there and flush that out with some fresh oil, because oil does get gummy over time. And there's a little bit of places you can oil in between, but you can't oil the entire thing because most of it is fairly protected from that lint. It can last a few years between oilings. Then after we've cleaned it and then we've re-lubricated everything, then we go through the functionality of the machine in its entirety and make sure that everything is working. And when I say in its entirety, I don't mean that we actually use every single foot that would go with the machine,
Yeah.
right? Like, but we make sure it can wind a bobbin, and we check all the dials and make sure that they're turning properly and that they're actually moving the mechanisms the way they're supposed to, that the reverse is working, that their forward and back is balanced. Because you can't balance your machine on your own. There are some where you have like a tweaker, but we try to reset that back to center position.
So do you like have a checklist for the things that then you run through?
Things that I check on every single machine are the free movement of the machine, make sure that it's moving as freely as possible, the timing, the adjustments for like the hook to the needle and the needle position to make sure that the needle is centered both forward and back and left and right, and make those adjustments if necessary, the tension balances, the balance forward and reverse, the bobbin winding, the clutch if bobbin winding disengages the sewing on your machine, then we check to make sure that the clutch is going to work, that the stitch selection is going to work. Buttonholes, I will kind of do a more simple check just to make sure that like the sensors are doing what they're supposed to. If your machine's computerized, make sure the sensors are all detecting what they're supposed to be detecting. Speed, make sure that the foot control is actually giving you a range of speed, that sort of thing.
Wow, that's tons. So there's not that much that we could be doing to prevent the need for taking it to the professionals, is there?
Not really. I mean, it's on a lot of the older machines, it's a lot easier to do it all yourself with some guidance for how to do it the first time. The other advantage of taking it to a professional is that I see hundreds, if not thousands of machines. And so I see the things that regularly go wrong. And so I'm going to delve deeper into certain machines, knowing that that might be a problem on this machine, and try to see if I can fix it before it becomes a problem rather than have it wait till it breaks and makes it worse.
Sure.
So there's certain things like old faffs. They use some weird lubrication back in the day. And so almost all of them get like crusty in certain areas, and so if I get a faff, I know to go and looking for those things, and that's not something you're going to know until it's already causing a problem with your machine.
Sure. Brilliant. So Charlie has a kind of similar question to that. Charlie asks, I'd love to hear what they would recommend sewers do regularly or each time they use their machine to proactively help with maintenance for both sewing machines, manual and electric, and overlockers. So what tips have you got for us?
So I touched on this a little bit, but what you should be doing is about every half dozen bobbins or so, you should be taking your needle plate off, taking your bobbin case out, your hook, if it's a front load, the hook will usually come out too, and cleaning out as much of the lint as you can possibly see in that area. While you're doing that, what you want to do is you want to suck it out with either a lint brush or a vacuum. You don't want to use compressed air. We use compressed air here in the shop in most situations because we remove all the covers.
Sure. So it can keep going rather than
That's
get stuck.
right. That's right. So if you're using compressed air to clean your machine and it's got all its covers on, or at least most of the covers on, quite often like it'll look really clean where you just blew. You're like, oh yeah, look how clean it is. But you actually just blew like a quarter of it further into the machine. And so then it runs the risk of getting into the motor and the gears and the belts, right? That sort of thing. And you really want to avoid that. So vacuum or lint brush. And then a drop of oil on your hook, a drop of oil on your needle bar. So the reason for that, needing oil much more regularly than the rest of your machine, as I had mentioned earlier, is most of the machine is fairly protected from the lint, but those two spots are quite linty because the thread runs right past your needle bar. And so I'm sure you've seen when you get that little ring of lint at the top of your needle bar, it's sucking out all of the oil that should be there.
Sure.
And so you want to keep replenishing that regularly. And same thing with your hook. Your thread goes around that hook every single stitch and wipes away all that oil.
Right.
So
if you've got a top loader, where am I putting my oil?
So the top load machines is a plastic bobbin case, so you don't need to oil that. Mm-hmm. But there's usually a little wick underneath them in the center that will oil the gears below it.
You know exactly what I'm going to be doing at the end of this call, don't you?
I remember because you told me you did it after our last conversation too.
I don't think I've done it since.
Oh, Zoe, don't tell me that.
No, I think I did when the episode then came out. I did, but yeah, it's been a while. It was actually one of my plans to do during the winter of care and repair, and I ran out of winter of care and repair for all the plans I had. But yes.
Yeah, it is a good idea. And that I like to say half a dozen bobbins or so, because sewing time is tricky, because unless you have a stitch count on your machine, which you may if you have a higher end computerized machine.
Oh, wow, that's like mileage.
Yeah, a lot of the newer higher end machines have a counter in, so you can see how many stitches you've done.
That's so funny.
And typically I ask people to bring their machines in around 1 million to 2 million stitches. So
Whoa.
yeah, it adds up pretty quickly. But unless you have a counter, like you don't really have any indication of how much movement your machine has actually done.
Yeah, and some people sew every day, some people sew once a month.
Mm-hmm. If you haven't touched your machine for, I'd say like 3 or 4 months or more, then I would give it an oil first anyway.
Okay, that's no one who listens to this podcast.
No, probably not. Hey, it might be seasonal. Some people like to garden in the summer, right?
It's true.
So
it's true.
There are some people who switch during the summer to their outside hobbies.
So, what about overlockers or sergers?
Same sort of thing. More often, honestly, because of the cutter, they create a lot of lint.
Right.
Right. So
yeah, often if you're using like knit fabrics, they're the kind, or like sweatshirt fleece, things like that. They often produce a lot more lint as well, don't they?
Well, yeah, and just because of the cutter, right? You're just creating lint for yourself on top of the thread. It's also creating lint from the fabric. And so anyone who's used an overlocker or a serger would know, like, it gets fuzzy really quickly. And when that happens, it's absorbing oil from those spots. So there's a couple of pivot points where the loopers go back and forth. So if you can find that bar that the looper is sitting on, that it pivots back and forth on, and a drop of oil there on both of your loopers.
Okay.
And then again, the needle bar.
Okay, awesome. Definitely going to do that as well.
Yeah, the overlockers get fuzzy, so you have to do it fairly often.
Okay, will do.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Right. Okay. So this is a really fun question from Flor. Flor asks, which sounds and signals not to ignore? I'm not very good at getting my machine serviced regularly. I do clean it regularly, Flor insists. And it seems fine, but I realise that some problems get a lot worse when ignored. So I'd love some pointers on which issues need professional help ASAP to prevent serious damage.
So when I read that question, I thought it was kind of funny because I was like, don't ignore any of the noises if it's unfamiliar.
Don't ignore anything.
So what I would say
That's a great answer right there.
What I would say is if it sounds louder but not weird, try oiling your hook. If that doesn't make the noise go away, maybe you should be concerned, because my machine gets noisier and then I put oil on the hook and then it's quiet again. That's going to happen because, like I said, once all the thread has absorbed all the oil in the hook, then the metal is rubbing directly on metal and it's going to be louder. So it's going to get louder and then you oil it and it gets quiet again, and it gets louder and louder and then you oil it and it gets quiet again. Squealing means that typically the motor sometimes makes a similar squealing noise, but squealing is usually a sign that metal is rubbing on metal dry, which means you've already missed the oiling point. You've gone too far. Because it's not going to squeal until there's already a pileup of metal dust kind of building up in that joint. So if it's squealing, you've already kind of missed your deadline for probably needing to re-oil whatever spot is squealing.
Okay, I want everybody listening to this podcast to put it on pause right now if they can. Run to your machine and give it a bit of oil just in case.
So that would be the one noise I'd be like, okay, that machine needs oiling. It needs oiling now before you build up enough dust that it seizes.
Right.
You don't want it to seize up, because if you get to that point, then flushing it out is not going to work as well, and you actually have to start taking the machine apart, which means that the servicing process is going to take longer. You're going to get charged more because it's extra labor involved. Noises like knocking noises, anything that like sounds like something is hitting something else, that's never a good sign.
Yes, I've had some knocking in the past.
There are some noises that, so I had mentioned the motor kind of making a squeaky noise. Sometimes your motor will make this little mouse chirpy noise. because the motor brush is rubbing against the armature of the motor and it just makes a little squeak, and it honestly doesn't cause a problem. A lot of the newer motors aren't designed to come apart. So like the older motors, I can go in there and grind down the armature a little bit and clean it up, and so that noise will go away. But the newer motors, they're not designed to come apart, so it's like the only way to fix this is to replace the motor.
Oh.
So you can live with a little chirpy noise, or you can replace the motor.
Okay.
But if you don't know what that chirpy noise sounds like, or you haven't identified that that is exactly where it's coming from, then I would kind of go with the assumption that that chirpy noise is a squealing of metal on metal, and it's probably a good idea to get checked.
Right. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, Steph asks, my computerized machine sometimes makes a faint whining sound whilst actually sewing. Does it need oiling, or is it normal? Or maybe it's just that I don't have a podcast going on music, so I'm actually hearing it.
Funny story is that I actually have my main machine. I got my big Bernina secondhand because the lady couldn't handle the hum.
Oh.
Could have been under warranty as a replacement because it kind of makes this noise, like the transformer in it makes a bit of a noise. So it's not that bad, but it was driving her crazy. So
that's so interesting. She's like, no, this is not good for my brain.
Yeah, and I always listen to music, so like I never hear it anyway. So I was like, yes, please, I will take your beautiful Bernina machine and I will enjoy it. I will, yeah.
So we think that maybe Steph's faint whining noise is just not listening to enough podcasts.
She's not listening to enough podcasts. It's hard to say without hearing the noise,
sure,
because what she might describe as a whine might be a squeal. It might be that hum of a transformer in the machine. It might be, they said that it only happens while sewing. Was that right?
Yes, while actually sewing.
While actually sewing. So again, it could be that the transformer is working harder and so it makes a louder hum, or it could be that it's actually a mechanical part making that noise. It's really hard. I don't really have a good answer for that.
Sorry, Steph. without some audio, we can't be sure. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Right, so Marielle says, how to aid a machine sewing through several layers of heavier fabric when it's struggling, and what can go wrong with the machine during that activity? I can imagine people shoving and tugging their coat fabric, for example, through. Like,
yeah.
What damage could that do, and how can we avoid it?
So the biggest issue that you'll run into with this sort of thing is needle deflection. If you're forcing the fabric through at the wrong time, then the needle's going to get bent backwards, and then it's going to hit the plate or the hook underneath.
Oh,
yeah.
It makes me want to wince.
Most 95% of needle hits are people forcing the fabric through.
Okay.
So if the machine can't do the feeding itself, you can use a hump jumper or height compensator, whatever you want to call it. I like the term hump jumper. I think it's fun.
I do too, yeah.
If you don't know what that is, it's like usually a little U-shaped device that goes on either side of the needle so that you can sew with the foot flatter. It's that pivoting of the foot in the upward or downward position that makes it harder for the feeding to go well. The other thing is if the fabric is so thick that you can't tell whether your presser foot is down or not, then you may run into the risk of sewing while it's up, even though it looks down because it's hitting your fabric, in which case you have no tension on your thread.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So we thread our machines with the presser foot up because it opens up the tension discs and allows the thread to go inside it. So if you have your presser foot in the up position, but you think it's down and you start sewing, you're going to get a big tangle of thread underneath. But I would be more worried about the deflection of the needle, and I would be utilizing the hump jumper, not forcing your machine to do anything it's not designed to do, using the hand wheel to get yourself over those situations, and just, if at all possible, let the machine do the feeding because it knows when to move the fabric.
Right, trust in the machine. Brilliant. Because you can also sometimes, if it's you're at the edge and you're struggling to get it to start, you can often like start a bit of way in, can't you? And then kind of use your reverse,
Yes.
so just to get it started.
That's what I recommend to people is if you're working on something thick and you're starting on the edge of something and you want to do a back and forth anyway to secure your stitches, turn your project backwards and then stitch towards the edge and then reverse and then flip it the correct direction and keep going.
I love that.
So then you're not trying to get over that hump at the beginning with this uneven foot that's facing upward.
Yeah. And often you don't need to necessarily buy a gadget for that, do you? You can just use some of your fabric folded a couple of times, couldn't you, to get the same thickness?
Yep. And honestly, that's going to be the best way to get something exactly the same thickness and the same friction.
Yes, so just keep a scrap of your fabric and make your own, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a little more work to go and like, oh, now I have to fold this many times and make sure it's not going to but whereas the hump jumper you might just have handy with the rest of your tools.
Of course, yeah.
And the hump jumpers, like the ones we sell anyway, have like two thicknesses. So they've got like a thinner side and a thicker side. And so you just choose whichever side actually matches the height better. But the fabric is also a great option because you probably have scraps already and you will be able to get it exactly the same height because you match exactly what you're working with now.
The main takeaway is don't shove, let it feed it itself.
Yeah, if you get needle hits and they create damage on the plate or the hook, then your thread can catch on those sharp edges and break or create little loopies underneath and that sort of thing. And if it's not breaking your thread, then it looks ugly or it causes more problems down the line than just breaking your needle in the moment or knocking your machine out of time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is that difficult to deal with?
Yeah, you definitely can't do that yourself.
Okay,
Yeah. I mean, the average person definitely can't do that themselves, right? So timing and I don't like talking about timing because people always think their machine is out of time.
You don't want to put it in their heads.
Yeah. So we often get people who come in and say, oh, the machine's out of time. And I've asked my staff, like, if somebody is giving you a diagnosis, ask them for the symptom because they might think the machine is out of time because it's skipping stitches. And it might be out of time because it's skipping stitches, but it might be an alignment of the needle to hook. Maybe they're just too far apart. It might be that their needle's not up all the way, right? Like it might, I'm not going to adjust their timing. I'll check the timing because they said, is the timing out? But I'm going to check the timing anyway. But if I know what their actual symptom was, I can check an array of things that might cause that symptom versus what they have sort of already got in their head was the problem that caused the symptom.
I love this. Okay, so shh, don't mention timing. So what is when the timing goes? Like, I don't know what that is.
Oh, okay.
What would that cause?
Your needle goes down through the fabric and then down below. And then there's a hook in the bottom that grabs the thread from the needle and wraps it around your bobbin. And that creates the twist to create the stitch. So if they're not meeting at the right time, either it's going to miss the thread or they're going to smash into each other.
Ooh, that sounds painful.
Yeah, so there's a very fine window of when those two need to meet up in order for it to do what it needs to do.
That makes sense.
So that's what, there's other timings as well. So there's also feed timing. So that's the feed dogs feeding the fabric at the correct time. So if sometimes people want to fix their machine themselves and they go and they're like, oh, the timing is out. And they're right, the timing is out. But they adjusted the timing in the wrong spot. So they fixed the hook and needle timing, needle to hook timing, but they've knocked out the feed timing. And so now the fabric is feeding while the needle is down. And so they've just created a new issue instead of, yeah. So there's multiple timings. So again, the timing is out, but what's the symptom? Because it could be something else.
So when the feed dogs are not in alignment or the timing has gone wrong for the feed dogs, what does that cause?
So the timing going out on the feed dogs is so rare unless someone's tried fixing their machine themselves.
Okay.
It's usually people trying to fix the needle to hook timing and doing it in the wrong spot that causes that, honestly. Or the belt skipping or something like that, where it's knocked both the needle and the feed dogs out.
Okay, so that's not something generally you would have to worry about.
No. More often you're going to find the feed dogs will stop feeding because lint has built up between them and they just literally can't rise up to the needle plate anymore.
Right.
So when you're cleaning out the lint underneath your needle plate, make sure you check between the feed dogs, because if that gets compact, then they just literally can't rise high enough
Right.
to feed your fabric.
Okay, well, we're all going to be doing that very soon, so you don't need to worry about that. Brilliant. Alrighty, so Anne says, looking forward to this. Yes, you should be looking forward to this, Anne. It's going to be amazing. So Anne is definitely looking for tips on sourcing replacement parts. Maintaining my parents' featherweight and Singer treadle machines has been easier than my 1960s Brother Charger. That sounds like a Ford Bronco or something. Because the really old machines have a cult following and specialised sellers seem fairly common. Is that something that you've found? That there's certain kind of cults and it's easy to get
Did
parts?
they mention what was the machine? Was it a featherweight?
So they said that they're maintaining their parents' featherweight and Singer treadle machines. They find that easier than their 1960s Brother Charger.
So the featherweights in particular, there's so many of them, and they do have a cult following. We actually do a featherweight social usually once a month, where people come and they just sew together with their featherweights because
Cute.
the featherweight shop in the States has done a great job of manufacturing parts that were previously unavailable and creating new parts or like new accessories for the featherweights in particular.
So when were these featherweights produced?
The 40s and 50s.
Right.
They're beautiful machines. I have one myself. I have a 222, which is more rare than the 221 that most people will see and know. The 221s are a flatbed machine. The 222s have a free arm, and that free arm is 7 inches around. So
Whoa.
tiny, so little.
You can make baby wear with that.
Yeah, I make little drawstring bags for my sister sometimes for her business, and being able to use that tiny free arm is very helpful. Anyway, back to the question.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
So there is definitely a cult following with featherweights in particular. I would say not so much on other vintage machines. So there are similar singers, so they're going to share some of the parts, and so that will translate over to other cast iron singers of that era. A lot of the common parts are easy to find, like the check springs and like the belts. There's not a lot that goes wrong with those old cast iron machines, so any other parts are more tricky to find. And with the Brother Charger, I don't know which part was hard to find. It's not a super common machine either.
Right.
So it's going to be a supply and demand thing.
Sure.
So if there's not a lot of those machines, then there's not really a lot of demand for them to create new parts for them, unfortunately.
Sure. So is it a case of like the newer the machine, the less interchangeable the parts are, like the more specialized the parts are? Do you know what I mean?
Yes. So the accessories are probably a little bit more interchangeable. So like the baby locks will play nice with other baby locks and other brothers, and the Genomes and the Kenmores and the Ilnans will play nice intermixed with each other for the accessories. Some of the internal parts will play nice with each other, but they do sort of make them so that in a decade you have to get a new machine if something goes wrong.
That's my fear, yeah.
Yeah. And that's not just computerized, right? The computerization of machines has made them really nice to use. The interaction with the machine is much more friendly and approachable. But computers, the technology advances constantly. And so if you use a computerized machine from 20 years ago, you're going to be like, oh man, I wish I had a better computer in this machine. Even if the parts are still working, you might find that you've just gotten used to computers being better than that. And so you've advanced sort of beyond those machines.
Your expectations are too high.
If they're sewing, then awesome. And some people will hang on to their machines for a long, long, long time. But embroidery machines are a big thing with that because machines older than like 20 years ago didn't have USBs. And so you can't get new designs for them because
Oh.
they've used like specialized cards or a weird cable or something. Whereas then they went to USB, and now a lot of them are Wi-Fi capable,
Oh, wow.
where you can just like download your designs directly to your machine. There's a bit of a technology update, but the mechanics are probably, hopefully, fine. The availability of the parts, you will find sometime the machines that are still around from 50, 70 years ago, if there's enough of them still around, you can still get parts for them. If they're a rare machine, less likely to get parts for them.
Maybe you should try and get another one just to harvest parts from it if you need to.
Yeah, I think I had a brother. If the brother charger is the one I'm thinking of, that machine, every time I see it or see one similar to it, there's a gear that's cracked in it, and you can't.
Oh.
Even if you could replace the gear, you would have to take half the machine apart to do it.
Oh.
So the labor would be pretty intense, even if you could get the part.
Shouldn't there be someone with a 3D printer just cranking out these?
Funny you should say that.
Oh.
Because I actually have a couple parts that I have found to be common enough that I've put the effort into going and getting 3D printed.
Really?
So I have older Elnas have a plastic presser foot lifter lever that will sometimes snap, and you can't get that part anymore. Now the machine would still sew. You just have to like lift the foot manually by the screw if you wanted to keep using it.
So annoying.
But it's actually a pretty simple part, so I just got someone to 3D print some for me. So, I mean, the advantage of technology is that we can fix some of those machines that don't have parts anymore.
So this could be the future.
Yeah, gears are a little trickier because they have to be really precise. I'm working on a specific gear that I know I can't get, but isn't that hard to change and is fairly common. But there's a lot of like refining of the part because it has to fit really well in order for it to work.
Right, okay. This is work in progress.
Yeah, that one's a work in progress. But I do try to put the effort in if I feel like there's enough of a need for us to go and get all of that designing done.
This is so good. I love this. Okay, that's exciting. Okay, so watch this space for those. Amazing. Okay, so we're really getting into the weeds here. We've got a few more questions again. We're already quite specific. Okay, so Catherine is asking, I would love to know if there are any tips on repairing automatic needle threaders. Mine recently broke and I do not have the best eyesight or fine motor dexterity and have been struggling to thread my needle manually. Is this something to leave to the pros? And then Steph responded to that saying, gosh, me too. Mine is always broken. When I take my machine for maintenance about every 2 years, they fix it, but invariably it only lasts a couple of months. Plus I've had it with ones that are manual pull down thingamajigs, plus the fully automatic ones. It's like they just threw it together without making a plan.
Yeah, so I kind of agree with the fully automatic ones. I just find it not that much more convenient to hit a button and then sit there and wait for it than to just pull it down myself.
Okay.
So I don't really understand the appeal of having all of that complicated machinery doing that for you, rather than just pulling down a lever yourself. But the problem with needle threaders is that the eye of your needle is extremely small. Thus, the hook that has to go through the eye of that needle is also extremely small. You cannot, on most machines, you cannot use an automatic needle threader on a needle smaller than an 8012.
Right, okay. Which is annoying because if you're using like a 7010, that's when you really need the threader.
Yeah, you need it even more, right? But unfortunately, they've sort of capped out at how small they can make that hook and still make it strong enough to actually function. So it's very fine and very delicate. And that's just kind of the nature of how it has to be in order for it to work. Now, what I have found is, especially with the ones that you pull down manually, the way I pull it down and the way you pull it down might be slightly different. So some people will put sideways pressure on it when they pull it down. And it actually kind of puts a little bit of pressure on the whole mechanism.
Oh.
Which, again, we're talking about a very small hole and a very small hook. And so if you put that little sideways pressure on them, then the hook gets moved over ever so slightly and then doesn't get through the eye of the needle. bending it, right? And then the next time you go to do it, it's not going to work because you now bent your hook a little bit. So part of the problem is that they're delicate.
What we're saying is that they don't work very well, yeah.
No, they're delicate.
They work.
So like if you're
Delicate,
gentle,
yes.
you just do not force them in any way. If anything gets stuck, be very careful. It's a very tiny little piece of metal, easy to bend. When they work great. Love them. So what I would recommend is if you've had problems with your needle thread and you take it in to get adjusted, try it before you leave, because if you put sideways pressure on it just the way you do it and the technician doesn't, then they've lined it up to work for them, but when you get home it's not going to quite line up just because you kind of hold it a little differently.
Right. So maybe ask the technician to show you it working and you can kind of see what they're doing maybe.
And then you try it, and if it works for you, then it's lined up. And then that's fine. Now, the other thing that I would recommend is if you're having an issue, there are external machine needle threaders that you can get. They're like $8 to $10 Canadian. They're not very expensive. So it's a little like device about the same size and shape as a tiny seam ripper. And you put the thread in sideways, and then you push it against your needle and slide it down. And when it finds the eye of the needle, it pushes the thread through.
Ah, I've seen those.
And that works on every machine because it's just based on the needle. So if you are having issues with your machine needle threader, you can get the external needle threader and it'll work on any machine. Again, very fine piece of metal that pushes that thread through. And so you don't want to put a lot of pressure on it, but it can be very handy, and you can just go grab another one and do it yourself. You don't have to get the part. You don't have to wait for the part to come in. You don't have to get someone else to put it on for you. So it can be a like $10 problem instead of a $30-$50 problem.
Awesome. Okay, that's really good advice. Thank you. Okay, great. Right, we've got one more question. So this is from Serena. Maybe a tad specific. Well, we're in the specific section, so that's fine. What's up with twin needles? My machine had issues with wider zigzag stitches, and the repair person immediately asked whether or not I used twin needles. I did occasionally. Is it a common or a known issue? Is there something I should pay attention to when using a twin needle to avoid messing up the zigzag? Is this something you've heard of?
I was a little baffled by that question, actually. I also don't know what the issue with the zigzag is. They said they were having an issue with the zigzag, but I don't know what the issue is.
True.
So was it a tension issue? Was it a skip stitching issue? I'm not sure. So were they using the twin needles with a zigzag? Because you can do that, but of course that also means that you have to be careful about your width because your needles are sticking out farther than they normally are. I don't really see, like, if your zigzag is working, your twin needle should also be working. Because if your needle is picking up the thread on a zigzag on both the left side and the right side, then it should also be doing that just both at the same time on a twin needle because it's doing the right and the left at the same time. I'm not really sure where that question would have come from.
Right, we don't know.
Unless the issue was the needle was hitting the side. There's another thing, like I don't know what the issue with the zigzag was. If the needle was hitting the side, it could be that they put on a twin needle and it wasn't centered, and so the needle struck and then knocked it out of alignment, the needle out of alignment.
Right.
In which case the zigzag would now also be out of alignment.
Right. So it's not a known thing that twin needles can create problems.
As long as you're carefully, like I said, you can use zigzag or decorative stitches with a twin needle, but you do have to be extra careful that you're not going beyond the width that it can handle when you're doing that.
That makes loads of sense.
Other than that, I don't see using a twin needle as being problematic.
Yeah. I've never really got on well with a twin needle on my regular machine, I must admit. The stitches have always... They've just never lasted very long, you know. What am I doing wrong? Any ideas?
I think my biggest suggestion when using a twin needle would be to use woolly nylon in your bobbin.
Okay.
Because if you use woolly nylon in your bobbin, then you get that extra little bit of stretch with the stitches. You want your tension to be a little looser on top, because if your tension is tight on top and you're getting that full breadth of the bobbin thread going back and forth on the back and you're not seeing the top thread pulling down to the bottom, then you've just got two straight lines. And the whole point of using a twin needle or doing like a zigzag stitch instead of a straight stitch on a stretchier fabric is that you can't do a straight stitch on a stretchy fabric. It's just going to break the thread. Mm-hmm. So the thread has to be loose enough that it pulls down a little bit so that it gives it some give.
Right. So adjust the tension on the top, but you don't need to adjust it in the bobbin at all.
Don't adjust the bobbin tension ever.
Okay.
If you need to have multiple tension settings in your bobbin, get a second bobbin case and mark it so you know which one's which.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
Bobbin cases are not designed to be constantly adjusted. So even if you know what you're doing, get a second one so you're not constantly changing it.
Okay.
Yeah. So sometimes you'll use different kinds of thread, and like if you're going to a heavier or a finer thread constantly and you find that adjusting the bobbin tension helps, then get a second one to use with that bobbin thread rather than adjusting it on your bobbin case.
Okay. I've been told. Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you so much for answering all those questions. That was super interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, it was fun.
So I want to hear about your business. So I see that you've moved. That's pretty major.
We just moved about a month ago.
Tell us everything. Like, why did you decide to relocate? And what's your new space like?
So we actually probably outgrew our original space within the first 6 months or so.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like when we first opened and when I first picked the spot, I mean, I would hope that we would grow and be able to move into somewhere bigger, but I didn't think it would happen as quickly. But after about 6 months, we were finding that the incoming donations of fabric or the textile recycling is something that like really takes up a lot of space. And because we didn't have a back room to do the work in, so that wound up just happening on the sales floor, which was very disruptive to the retail flow, right?
Yeah.
And so we really wanted to find an opportunity, and we kind of had this opportunity presented to us through the landlord as a space opened up like next door to us, and it kind of just got the idea going that, oh, a bigger space, that sounds like a good idea. Oh, a back room, that sounds like a good idea. So that idea was now planted in my head, but it didn't work out because they wanted us to do a lot more renovation in there than really we could handle. So when unfortunately another sewing store in town wound up closing down, but their space was exactly what we needed. And so we wound up moving into that space, which was really like it was a good opportunity for us because it was already set up as a sewing store. So we didn't have to do any renovations.
Right, yeah. It's wild to me how some landlords, or a lot of landlords, they kind of expect the tenants to do the renovation when they move in. It's like, that's the wrong way around.
Sometimes commercially, the person moving in wants to do the renovations anyway because they want it to be to their specs. And
yeah,
so
I can see that, yeah.
But it was a lot of stuff. I'm like, I don't want to fix your building.
Yeah, totally, because I don't own your building, yeah.
Yeah, it was just too much work for, again, I didn't know like how long we would end up staying in that space either. So when this opportunity came up, it was like, this is exactly what we needed. And it's a beautiful space, and it's just so many big windows, so it's so bright. The space that I was working in before was literally a closet. So it was a big storage room.
I can just imagine you there with like a head torch, just like a little miner.
I actually got dental loops with the little magnifier and the flashlight on them. Cute. They're very nice. And lamps, and yeah, it was dark. And now I'm surrounded by windows. It's so bright in here. I can see what I'm doing. It's quite lovely. We have a work area for sorting and receiving and that sort of thing now too. And our classroom is fully functional all the time rather than being in the middle of the retail section. So previously we could only do classes in the evening. Now during the day we can do private lessons, and we can rent out the studio space to people who want to use it, and we can utilize the big tables for cutting batting, like prepping pre-cut batting and that sort of thing, whereas before it was harder to do because that classroom space was kind of limited during the day.
Yeah. Oh, that's so exciting. So when we spoke before, your business was more geared towards quilt making than garment making. Has that shifted at all? Like I know you were catering to both, but that seemed to be more your focus initially.
Yeah, only because I'm more of a quilter. I don't know, but I did make a dress. I think you'll be very proud of
I
me.
am very proud of you.
I made a dress for Frocktails. Have you,
Woo!
have you been to a Frocktails? I know
No,
it's
but I am aware of their ilk.
okay. So this was the first time Frocktails came to Victoria, and I made a dress for Frocktails. So it was and it wasn't even quilted. It wasn't even a quilted dress. And I've decided that I like working with knits much better than I like working with wovens when it comes to garments.
Oh, interesting.
So I've made 2 garments that I didn't hate the process the entire time, and I actually wore at the end proudly, and they were both knits.
What style of garments were they, or are
So
they?
one was a hoodie. So I patchworked some scraps from my friend who had made some hoodies for her nephews. So she had like the little leftover pieces from cutting out her pattern pieces. And so I patchworked those pieces together, and then I cut out the shape for a hoodie. And I just copied a hoodie I already had. I didn't use a pattern. I just cloned my clothes. And I love that hoodie. And I even like doubled up layers in some areas so that I could cut through, and then the other colors like poked out. Yeah. So
Oh, can you send me a photo of this, please?
I will send you a photo.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the other one was this dress that I made for Frocktails, which again I cloned from a shirt that I had, and I just made it longer so that it was a dress instead of a
Okay,
shirt.
amazing. We're going to need another photo.
I will send you photos. That I have a great photo because they're a professional photographer
Oh,
at
of
Frocktails, so
course.
there's actually a really nice photo of me in the dress.
Was it really
I will send
fun?
it to
Did you have a fun night?
It was fun. I'm usually in bed around 9, so I
Same.
petered out pretty quickly, but
But you were there. You've got
but I
photos.
was there and I had a good time. Yeah, it was
Yay.
fun.
So is your stock kind of a bit broader in terms of crafty discipline now?
The thing is, we actually get more. Well, we don't get more garment fabric. It's just that the quilting cotton comes and goes so quickly,
Okay.
whereas the garment fabric, I think, is harder partly because we tend to get a lot of prints. It's either prints or like very boring neutrals
Yeah.
donated.
Which don't fly out. Yeah.
Yeah, so they don't. And the other thing is, garment sewists want like 3+ meters of everything. So if we don't have like when it's brought to us, if there aren't 3 meters of it, it's again less appealing to the garment sewists.
I imagine also as well, when it comes to quilting cottons, there's not much variety in terms of the properties of that fabric. You know, obviously like the design can be different and the colour can be different, but there's not that much variety within quilting cottons as such.
Yeah.
Whereas with garment fabric, there is a much wider variety of weights and thicknesses and fibres and properties and body and drape and da-da-da.
Yeah.
And so it might be harder for somebody to see that fabric and think, oh, I know exactly what that's going to be, or I know what I could do with that, you know?
Yeah, and so the other thing is, because garment fabrics are so varied, I mean, there's also like upholstery fabrics and canvas and that sort of stuff too, but because there's such a variation in non-quilting fabrics, we don't necessarily get like a section of the same kind of fabric.
Sure. So it might be harder to display in a way.
It's harder to, like, people come in, they're like, I want to make this thing and I have this vision and I want it to be this color and it's going to be, so it's a little bit harder to match up the garment sewists with the right fabrics.
It's almost like you need to come at it from the other angle, don't you? It's like, what can I make with this fabric? Not, I want to make the thing. Where's the fabric for it? Like, that's not the shop.
That's sort of how we do our classes, is we try to tailor our classes around what we've got.
Oh, cool.
So we got a giant roll of waffle weave.
Oh, did you?
I was plain white waffle weave.
Where did that come from?
I don't know, but it was so we've sold quite a bit of it, and last we counted there was still 18 meters left.
Oh, how much was there?
It was enormous. There must have been at least 30 meters on there to begin with. It was crazy. Anyway,
Everyone's getting dressing gowns.
So we're doing a class on making a robe.
Yeah, you are. Of course you
So
are.
then that waffle weave is being supplied with the class.
That's so clever.
And so that's what we try to do as we try to encourage people to come at it with what's available and then figure out how to work it into something. Rather than, I have this vision of exactly what I want to create, and so I'm going to find this fabric in this color, and right? Part of using what's available means getting creative.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and we just got a bunch of smaller pieces of jersey. So we're going to do an underwear class.
Yay! I love this.
So we kind of have to create that need for the garment fabrics a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because it is hard to match up. And I find sometimes people have a hard time imagining, like you said, it's hard to maybe look at something and be able to tell what it's going to be.
Yeah, it takes a lot of experience. It takes a lot of years of making different types of garments to start to really get that sense.
And so if we put the effort into kind of doing that matchup and then presenting it to people, we find that they have an easier time getting into it and learning the skills for that, and then they can go forward and make more if they want, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's very creative of you. I love this.
I recently got, with the other sewing store closing down as well, one of their workers is now working for me as my full-time class coordinator / instructor.
Oh, so is this a development? This is a development in the last year as well, then?
Yes.
More
so
staff.
Now she is a garment sewer. And so we had this funny thing going on where I'm like, I'll make pants if you make a quilt. And I made pants and she hasn't made a quilt yet. So I gotta, I'm still picking on her about that. But
I feel like a quilt will take longer.
I've made 2 pairs of pants since then.
What's the ratio that's fair? How many pairs of pants to one quilt?
I mean, baby quilt. Come on, she can do that in a weekend. It's fine.
Would you accept a cushion cover?
I would accept a placemat.
Oh, that's even smaller. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So she pieces it. If it's patchwork, she quilts it. She binds it. Come on, do that in the afternoon.
This is going to be cute. Would you ever get an apprentice or a trainee to help?
I just got one.
Tell all.
Very, very fresh. So we're sort of in a trial phase to see if it's a good fit. But also a woman. She's coming in because she still has a full-time job. So it's sort of she's coming in a little bit just to kind of get a feel, trying to get to the point where she can maybe be independent and then think about whether she wants to fully commit and quit her job and that sort of thing. So it's still trial. We'll see. It's hard to say.
Yeah, but this is very exciting because, when we were speaking before, you said about how difficult you'd found it to get an in to having this profession. And so that's really nice that you're making it easier for somebody else to do so.
I think that it isn't probably the most sought after job in the world either. So I think a lot of people end up landing in it as they stumble across an opportunity. The technician that trained me was he was a mechanic for big equipment in the Arctic.
Oh. I feel like that's a job that only people from Canada would have.
Yeah, so he would go up to the territories and he would work on drill equipment and stuff up there. So that was his job, but he got older and hurt his back or whatever, and so then he needed to work with something smaller, but he had that mechanical background, and so now he can work on smaller mechanics. So he just had mechanical experience, but he didn't necessarily have sewing machine experience, and it translated. I don't really know the background of most technicians I know. I should ask them more. I'm curious now.
You should create a meetup where you all get together and go for beers and have a ching wag about how you got into it.
When we go for training, you can only get training if you've already got a job, but we get training on the new machines, right? And so I do get to meet up with them usually once every couple of years. Once every couple of years, when a new machine comes out, we get together and we get to learn the new machine and
okay, make a point next time. Ask some background.
How did you get into this?
Yeah,
how did you get into this? Yeah, I should. I'm curious now.
Yeah, I am too. Awesome. So, have you discovered any of the products or offerings that you had for your business have been more popular than you predicted, or the reverse? Any products or offerings that weren't embraced in the way that you hoped or expected?
I think people are really excited to get rid of stuff
Right.
and less excited to get stuff.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So we're starting to find that we need to find more ways of outputting the fabric and donations, because the input, the donations that come to us, are numerous.
Right.
And
Okay.
our recycling is growing. So we have textile recycling. I don't know if we had textile recycling when I talked to you last. Yeah, I think we've had a couple times where we've had like 300 pounds worth of textiles come in on a end of month drop off day.
Wow.
You imagine like 200, 300 pounds a month of textiles that we are diverting from landfill, and like that's a lot of waste. And so I get why people don't want to take on more. But then also you see a bunch of people going and buying new fabric elsewhere. So it's but the incoming is definitely more than the outgoing. So we're trying to find a balance and solutions for that.
Yeah. So, how have you been um, moving things along?
So we do Free Fabric Friday on the last Friday of the month, every month. So anything that's been around for a long time or isn't quite up to a quality where we feel like we can sell it, we will give it away.
Oh, that's
And
great.
yeah, so people come in on the last Friday of the month to see what's available, and then they, might do some other shopping or whatever. We've also sort of made some connections with teachers. So if stuff has been around for a while, then we put it out to the teachers from the local high schools to see if they can use it for their fashions classes. I find kids are much more interested in figuring out what to do with the stuff they've got than the adults are. The
Interesting.
kids are quite happy to just, oh, this fabric's funky. What can I do with this? Whereas the adults are like, I can't be seen wearing that crazy pattern. So the kids are a little bit more wild and inventive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's fun watching the kids. We got more kids classes now that we have more instructors and instructors that are good with kids. So we've had quite a few more kids classes, and watching the kids having a good time and sometimes making some weird things, and it's like,
I
yeah,
love
you
that.
go, is awesome.
This is the time to make the weird things. Do it.
This is right.
So, what about the future? What's going to happen in the next year? Any ideas? Any plans? Anything you can share? Or is it all secret?
Well, right now I'm just sort of trying to find some sustainability in my life and the store because there's been so much change recently. So honestly, right now the biggest change in my plans is that we're getting a new logo.
Yay!
I saw the first draft yesterday and I'm very excited about it. So
Exciting. Do you know what? Check Your Thread is getting a new logo right now as well.
yeah,
Yes.
virtual high five.
Woo. Yeah, I'm really excited. I mean, I love the current logo, but I had to be honest with myself, and it doesn't say sewing or sustainability. So I might leave some of this in because I think by the time this conversation comes out, the logo will be done and out. So I look forward to seeing yours as well. When it sounds like yours is fairly imminent.
The digital stuff will probably get switched over pretty quickly. So I imagine, I don't know when you're posting this.
This will probably be out June.
Yeah, it should be out there by then for sure.
Awesome.
So,
I
yeah.
look forward to it. But anything else aside from the fact that you're going to have a new logo?
Um, we just really want to grow our classes and sort of focus a little more on the service ends of things. So the classes, the education, and the servicing, because as a green business, while a lot of our money is from selling stuff, it would be nice if we could rely on the labor and not stuff, right?
Yeah, 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 of course.
But we need the stuff a little bit to pay the bills, but I just feel really strongly about the education and the services that we provide,
Yeah.
and trying to bring the income in with the service that we provide, so people are paying for the people and not the stuff.
Oh, I love that. That is a beautiful way to wrap this up. Thank you so much for your time. It's been so nice to speak to you again, and I'm so excited about your business, where it's at and where it's going.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always lovely to chat with you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!